Bhakti Swami Srila Bhakti Swami Maharaj ki jai. Srila Bhakti Swami Maharaj ki jai. Srila Bhakti Maharaj ki jai. Srila Govinda Maharaj ki jai. Srila Bhakti Padmanabha Maharaj ki jai. Srila Bhakti Maharaj ki jai. Srila Bhakti Bhakti Maharaj ki jai. Srila Bhakti Planetarium Swami Maharaj ki jai. Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Swami Maharaj ki jai. Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Swami Maharaj ki jai. Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Swami Maharaj ki jai. Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Prabhupada ki jai. Srila Bhakti Paramahansa Srila Gokishore Das Bhakti Maharaj ki jai. Srila Bhakti Satchidananda Srila Bhakti Vinod Thakur ki jai. Srila Bhakti Vaishnava Sarvabhauma Srila Jagannath Das Bhakti Maharaj ki jai. Shri Gauri Vedanta Charya Srila Baladeva Jabhushan Prabhu ki jai. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur ki jai. Srila Narottam Srinivas Shamananda Prabhu Chaya ki jai. Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami Prabhu ki jai. Shri Rup Sanatan Bhatta Raghunath Shri Jiva Gopal Bhatta Das Raghunath Goswami Prabhu ki jai. Shri Sarup Damodar Roy Ramananda Shri Gaur Parshvadana ki jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur ki jai. Prem se kaho Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaur Bhaktivinoda ki jai. Shri Antaji Mayapur Shrimataji Gaujanaji Mataji Kalaji Vituji Tanuji Matajunaji Pujo Pramakashi Tan ki jai. Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopi Gogoviran Dwadasudharama Krishi Raj Mandala ki jai. Shri Shamakun Radhakun Yamuna Ganga Tulsi Bhakti Devi ki jai. Shri Yogamaya Paramasi ki jai. Tapishwar Mahadev ki jai. Jagannath Baladev Subhaja Sridhar Shakti ki jai. Shri Purushottam Chaitra ki jai. Shri Srila Bhagavan ki jai. Bhakti Pradhan Shankara Maharaj ki jai. Vandana Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Shri Harinam Sankirtan ki jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai. Samagata Bhakta Vrinda ki jai. Nitai Gopinanandi Hari Hari Bol.
So today is a very special day. Just keep the mic over there, on the floor, wherever. Today is a very, very auspicious and exalted day for our Gaudiya Saraswat Guru Parampara. Those who are coming in the line of Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur and his disciples and followers, and who are coming in the line ultimately of Srila Sachidananda Bhakti Vinod Thakur. So one of the most prominent disciples of Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur who was regarded by many of the very exalted disciples of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur as being even their Siksha Guru. So that personality is none other than Nitya Lila Pravishta, Om Vishnu Pad Paramahansa, Asto Tarasata, Sri Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Goswami Maharaj, my beloved Siksha Guru. And today is his Tirobhav, his disappearance day, 33 years ago, in 1988. He disappeared on this day, which is also Amavasya. And so our Gurudev, Srila Bhakti Vedanta Narayan Goswami Maharaj, our beloved Srila A.C. Bhakti Vedanta Swami Prabhupada, his Gurudev, Srila Bhakti Pragyan Keshav Goswami Maharaj. No talking of the kids. All of these personalities had very deep, intimate, and very reverent association and relationships with him. So, to recount his glories on this day and on his appearance day is not such an easy thing, especially when we start to discuss his teachings. It's one thing to recap a person's life of service, which takes quite some time, for Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj, his biographical sketch and so forth. It's one thing. But it's another thing to delve somewhat deeply into their teachings. All of our great exalted Siksha Gurus in our line, they have all contributed very, very substantially to the preaching mission of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. They have all sacrificed their lives 108% to the mission of Mahaprabhu and to the service of their Guru Pada Padma, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, and his descendants. So, it's not an ordinary thing to try to become acquainted, to begin to become acquainted with their mood, their bhavs, how they expressed themselves, how they revealed their realizations. So practically speaking, amongst all the different disciples, there are so many wonderful personalities in their books especially. For example, Srila Bhakti Pramod Puri Goswami Maharaj, one of the topmost personalities amongst the disciples of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. The editor. Daily he would speak with Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Throughout his life of 102 years, he wrote, I don't know the number, but every single decade, he wrote many, many hundreds, maybe thousands of articles. Very learned personality, very exalted. When you hear about his qualities, how humble he was, how his own angle of understanding and teaching is very exacting. But he considered Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj to be his Siksha Guru. He even wrote a Vyas Puja offering for him, and named him as his Siksha Guru. Our beloved Srila Prabhupada, for those who are connected with him, they should know what was his relationship with Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar. And today, I'm going to make that perfectly clear. What was his relationship? I'm going to read their own words in their mutual conversations. I'm going to read Srila Prabhupada's own words, where he tells all of his disciples, I consider Pujapad Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj to be my Siksha Guru, he said. Even my Siksha Guru, what to speak of the benefit others will derive. So, when we try to understand this personality on this day, you cannot separate him from his relationships. Our Param Gurudev, Bhakti Pragyan Keshav Goswami Maharaj, he chose Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj to be his sannyas guru, even though he was quite senior to him in years of service to Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, because he came to Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur at a very young age, something like 1916, I believe it was. Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj came in 1925, 9 years later. Our Gurudev always pointed out what was the mood of Srila Sridhar Maharaj toward his Guru Maharaj. And he was the topmost servitor, managing the entire Gaudiya Mats, had the most intimate relationship with Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, of those who were in the Brahmachari ashram and so forth, renounced. But after the disappearance of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he chose Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj to be his sannyas guru. Even though Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj considered him his spiritual superior by dint of his relationship with Prabhupada Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. So, we should try to know why is this personality so revered? What is it about him? What is it about his qualities, about his character, about his preaching, his seva, his presentation of the philosophy? You know, Srila Bhakti Pramod Puri Maharaj used to come and visit at the Mutt, Srila Sridhar Maharaj, before he became known by the Westerners. And at the Mutt they knew him as Kauna Puri Maharaj, because he stayed in Kauna, Ambika Kauna, serving in a temple for many, many years. That's a whole wonderful story in itself. And he used to talk intimately with Srila Sridhar Maharaj. And when the Westerners began to come to Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj for guidance, starting within like 3 months after our Srila Prabhupada departed from this world, there's very important reasons why the ISKCON leaders began to come to him, because Prabhupada told them to. He told them. They asked him, who can we go to for guidance after you leave? And he directly said, my godmother, Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar. It wasn't the first time that he told that. But what then began to take place was an incredible transcendental miracle. That Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj, who was very elderly at that time, when our Srila Prabhupada passed away, he was, I think, 81 years old. Prabhupada was 80 years old, and Srila Sridhar was 81. He was 1 year older than our Srila Prabhupada. So when our Srila Prabhupada left this world, then the leaders of his worldwide institution, they began to approach Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj. And his health was not good. His health was not good. In fact, you can see in the photo of the final meeting between Srila Prabhupada and Srila Sridhar Maharaj in 1977, there's a photo of them standing on the rooftop together. And Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj looks very thin and gaunt. You can see. And later on, he again somewhat recovered from that. But at that time, he thought that he would not survive our Srila Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. He would not survive him, he thought. But miraculously, Krishna kept him in this world until 1988. That's 11 more years. During that time, the unbelievable flow of Harikatha that came from him was so highly regarded, in the English language actually. He was so erudite in the English language, even though he hadn't spoken much English for many, many years. But he was highly educated and genius, incredible genius. And the use of the English language, any of us can attest that we are not as fluent as he. His vocabulary, his way of using the English language to convey very subtle points of philosophy. So, what he spoke in the recorded conversations with him, many, many darshans, especially from around 1979 onwards, there were some recorded darshans, and especially after 1980, then many darshans were recorded because some of the ISKCON leaders began to come to him regularly, and they recorded all of these discussions. And they're astonishing, really. If anybody listens to them, which I did, then you will become captured by a very sweet flow of his katha. This is one of the main things about his katha, how it flowed. And there you cannot understand and experience this unless you really go very deeply in your heart in begging for his divine connection and association. And then a very amazing thing happens. I don't remember who it was. One of our god brothers, god sisters, I can't remember who it was. But later on, many, many years later, or maybe it wasn't even a god sister or a god brother, maybe it was a disciple of Gurudev. Oh, now I'm remembering. It was Chota Tungavidya. Do you know who that is? Yes. So she began to listen to Srila Sridhar Maharaj's Katha, his tapes, in his recorded tapes. She began to just listen. And then something happened and she said, I can't believe it. The flow of his Katha. He said, it's like he has a mystic power of speaking Harikatha, like a mystic power. So anyway, it was a completely entrancing, practically hypnotic, and you just become surrendered in the flow. That I experienced. Shri Guru Gaudam Gadandhari Guru Bharira Govinda Ji Ki Jai. So about those conversations, those darshans, about that, Srila Bhakti Pramod Puri Maharaj, who had read the books that had been made from these darshans in the early, when was it? In the early 1980s. After around 1982, then his darshans began to be transcribed and printed as books. We know the titles of so many of those books. Can anyone name one? Anyone else?
Search for Shri Krishna Reality.
Yeah, anyone?
Loving Search.
Golden Volcano, what?
Loving Search.
Loving Search. That's already said. Yes. Yeah. These are all such classics. Then there was also a series that they started, and that ended up being 4 volumes, called Sermons of the Guardian of Devotion. Then they made a few other books as well. Yeah, you've got one there. Okay. So all of these are in the folio. There's an actual folio of Srila Sridhar. I'm going to be reading from it today. It's a folio, just like the database is a folio. So all the transcriptions of Srila Sridhar Maharaj's lectures. Altogether, I've heard Nishringa Maharaj, who was kind of like the keeper of these, Tripurari Swami and Nishringa, they were the keepers of these recorded conversations in cassette form, and then later they digitalized them and so forth. But there was about 1,200 hours, they said, quite substantial. And the thing is, you will hear certain themes that Srila Sridhar Maharaj will continually repeat. But each time that he repeats it, it's completely fresh and unique. And how he adds that into the flow. That's the thing. He could talk 1,000 times about Sharanagati, which he does. But each and every time, it's completely new angle and understanding and depth and emphasis, all of this. So when Bhakti Pramod Puri Maharaj started to look at these books and read through them, right, which were spoken in English, he made a comment. He said in Pujapad Sridhar Maharaj's life, he did not speak so many of these things. This is very unique, what he's giving at the very end of his life. Right? And he said, these are such important transcripts that they should all be translated into Bengali from English. Can you understand how important something being translated from English into Bengali? So today we're going to try to hear little parts of nectar. Also, Srila Sridhar Maharaj wrote one epic Sanskrit poem, 72 verses long, Prema Dhamma Deva Stotram. Who's heard the name before? Prema Dhamma Deva Stotram. Who has not heard the name before? Very few people know, actually, what Srila Sridhar Maharaj has given. That is one of his greatest contributions. He was, in fact, when the first time that during Kartik, his appearance days during Kartik, and the first Kartik that I went on with Srila Gurudev in 1994, we celebrated in some ashram in Braj. And I remember Srila Gurudev, he was leading us, and Jai Shri Guru Govinda Ki Jai. So he was leading us, and I noticed that one of the things that he emphasized was how great of a poet Srila Sridhar Maharaj was. Now, in our line of the great poets, Krishnadas Kaviraj, Rupa Goswami, all these great personalities, to be regarded as a very great poetic personality conveying these exalted truths is very great, what's it called, accolade. There was a godbrother, we've all heard his name before, Srila Akinchana Krishnadas Babaji Maharaj. So you're all familiar with him, Akinchana Krishnadas Babaji, yes? Yes. So, he, very exalted Mahabhagavat, very exalted Mahabhagavat. Completely exalted on the transcendental platform, having no connection with this world. And he was the Kirtan Acharya of the Gaudiya Math at the time when he was living. he would do kirtan at least about 6 or 8 hours a day, and the other rest of it he would chant japa. Barely ever saw him sleeping. Very rarely saw him to eat anything. A very exalted personality. And he used to be very closely intimate relationship with Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj, as he would be with many others, Bhakti Dayata Madhav Maharaj and other personalities. And he would wander, completely renounced personality. And he would just appear in this Gaudiya Mat or that Gaudiya Mat, and even though there were some conflicts, he didn't pay any attention. And so, one time, when he was staying in Sri Chaitanya Saraswati Mat of Srila Sridhar Maharaj, Srila Sridhar Maharaj got news, probably through his family members who lived in the village where he was born. Srila Sridhar Maharaj's village is in Gaurmandala, and it's called Hapaniya, which means sweet waters. So, in that village, Krishnadas Babaji would go there sometimes, and he would take the dust on his head and eat granules of dust and circumambulate the birthplace. And so one time when Srila Sridhar Maharaj found out that he was doing this, he was a little bit annoyed. Why are you are going to my birthplace? Huh? You're my godbrother, you know? And you know what his response was? He said, and by the way, Akinchana Krishnadas Babaji memorized the entire 72 shlokas of Prema Damadeva Stotram, which is the complete presentation of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's life and his teachings in 72 verses. And the meter, the Sanskrit meter, is a very rhythmical meter that is used by Rupa Goswami in some of his poetry. Prema Dama Deva Meva Nomi Gauda Sundaram. That's the meter. So Krishnadas Babaji would spontaneously sing various shlokas that he liked especially from that poetry during his kirtans. He would be doing kirtan, then he would simply sing one of these verses. So he had a very, very great appreciation of that. And he told, when Srila Sridhar Maharaj asked him, why are you going to my birthplace? What is this nonsense? He says, I go to your birthplace to worship the dust there, because I consider your poetry to be practically on the level of Srila Rupa Goswami. Not a small thing. So, we'll start by hearing Rajendra Nandan Prabhu. He wanted to read some words directly from Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj. I think it's what, the introduction?
It's part of the
Of
introduction.
the Lord's loving search for his lost servant.
One of the reasons that
Start.
I pray to my spiritual masters that I can represent Srila Maharaj's words properly. He did an amazing thing. He was able to take you from the intellectual platform into the realm of the heart. And that was a special genius he had. But there's one section in here. Usually we think about our own struggles on this side of the aisle, how we're going to get into Krishna consciousness and how to search for Krishna. And Srila Maharaj had a book, Search for Sri Krishna, also. But this one is the opposite, the loving search for the lost servants. So both are searching. But there's one section in here where, from the perspective of Krishna, he's able to present a very beautiful description of what Krishna is, what it's like for Krishna. You know, like you say, walk a mile in my shoes. A very beautiful and encouraging description of what it's like for Krishna to bring us home, to bring us back to the spiritual world. So I'll just read it, it takes a minute. The loving search for his lost servant. Great intensity is expressed here in a simple way. It is a mad search, an urgent campaign. With great earnestness, Krishna comes to deliver his lost servants. Krishna comes to take us home. As I said, we're just seeing it from our side, how difficult sometimes the struggle is. But we don't see what's going on Krishna's side, how intensely he's desiring to bring us home. It's a mad search. The Brihad Bhagavatamrita is written that once, as Krishna and the cows were returning from Vrindavan forest, at the end of the day, a boy had just attained spiritual emancipation and entered Vrindavan as a cowherd boy. Seeing his lost servant.
Do not go so close, it's a little muffled.
Seeing his long lost servant, Krishna embraced him, and both of them fainted in ecstasy. All of Krishna's other cowherd friends were astounded. Is that better?
Yeah.
Were astounded, thinking, what is this? Krishna has lost his senses by embracing this newcomer. How is it possible? Then as all of the cowherd boys looked on astonished, Balaram came to Krishna's relief and somehow managed to rouse him. Then Krishna addressed his friend with great affection. Why did you stay away? Why have you been living away from home for so long? How is it possible for you? How could you bear my separation? You left me, and you have been passing life after life without me. Still, I know what trouble you took to return to me. You searched for me everywhere, and went to beg from house to house. And you were chastised by many, ridiculed by many, and you shed tears for me. I know all these things. I was with you. And now, after great trouble, you will again come back to me. In this way, Krishna addressed his long-lost servant and welcomed him. And when Krishna returned home, he took the newcomer to his side to take prasadam. In this way, a new recruit is earnestly welcomed by Krishna himself. So, the Lord's search for his lost servants is a loving search. It is not ordinary, but from the heart. And the Lord's heart is not an ordinary heart. Who can estimate what type of search he is engaged in? Although he is full in all respects, still he feels pangs of separation for each and every one of us, however small we may be. In spite of his supreme position, he has room for us in a corner of his loving heart. That is the nature of the infinite. Such an absolute autocrat, absolute good is Krishna. An autocrat is not under law. It is not that if Krishna gives himself to one, another will be lacking. The infinite is not like that. Rather, there is an infinite supply at his command. So he is the employer of ras, Akila Rasamrita Sindhu. And he is searching for his lost servants to bring them home. Otherwise, we have no hope. Our solace, our consolation in life is that ultimately we are under the care of such a loving Lord. Glory to Srila Sridhar.
Can you give a little comment on that?
Well, there was once, like Prabhupada once said, Satsarita Maharaj came to him with some typing, and he was thinking, when is Prabhupada going to notice me and say something? And he just left his typing. And Prabhupada followed him to the door, and he said, this is not a mechanical thing. If you love me, I'll love you. So similarly, in our journey, there's something required from our side. We can hear from Srila Maharaj just how much his he is earnestly endeavoring to bring us home. If we have the proper vision,
he himself had an idea. He himself had an idea, an inspiration that in his temple, Chaitanya Saraswati Mat, he wanted to build a special temple that was depicting the journey that Sanatana Goswami is. But if you want to see someone who really I consider to be the greatest recipient of Krishna's mercy, I can direct you, Narada. And then he begins to direct him on a continuing journey. And where does he go next? King Indra in the heavenly planets. So like this, he goes from one to the next to the next to the next. Hanuman and Pandavas and all of this is there. And finally, he goes to Goloka Vrindavan, ultimately. So this incredible journey is described by Sanatana Goswami. But the second part, Brihad Bhagavatamrita, which our Gurudev has also given lectures on, and there's a whole book presenting it, it's called Going Beyond Vaikuntha. That book, based upon the lectures of Srila Bhaktivedanta Narayan Maharaj on the Brihad Bhagavatamrita, an overview of that history of Gopal. Two were done by Manjari. So, also in ISKCON, Gopi Puranadana, our godbrother, he did a very excellent translation and edition, but not as in-depth as Srila Gurudev's, but very, very well done. Brihad Bhagavatamritam in 3 volumes. So Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj loved this book so much, and he considered this to be such an incredible presentation of the philosophy of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And he wanted this to be presented to the world. And he himself came up with the idea that, there should be a temple depicting the journey of Gopakumara, which just goes higher and higher and higher like this. So he related that desire of his to our Srila Prabhupada in a conversation. And he mentioned that I had this idea, but I had no means, I could not do it. Perhaps you would like to do it. And then Srila Prabhupada agreed. He said, yes, we will do it there in Mayapur. And that temple will be built under your direction. So that what's going up in Mayapur right now, actually the idea came from Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj. TOVP, they call it, Temple of the Vedic Planetarium. They have some other variations also. It's not exactly depicting the journey of Gopakumara as the original plan was. Maybe that was a better plan than what they're trying to do now. I don't know. You can judge for yourself. But nevertheless, that is how it came about. So that, we have the book there also? No, that, yeah. Show them the painting inside the book. There was a special painting commissioned for this book. And it was, yeah, you might have seen this before. This is at the end of Gopakumara's journey. Oh, can you give it to me? It's a very famous artist. What was his name? DJ Sharma. Yeah. So, our godbrother, Govinda, Sri Govinda Prabhu, he went to pick it up from that artist and brought it back. So this painting is a very, very famous artist painting. His style you can see in all of his paintings. And what he's showing here is the crescendo. It is like the ultimate end of that journey where this Gopakumara, who's really depicting us, the jivas, who are wandering, who Krishna is searching for them, lifetime after lifetime after lifetime, and Krishna has his loving search for his lost servant, which is all of us. And so Srila Sridhar Maharaj told in his book, this book here, Loving Search for the Lost Servant, he told the whole story in such an amazing way. Every single one of you have to read this book and have your heart completely stolen away by Srila Sridhar Maharaj's beautiful presentation of this whole journey. And finally, what's happening here? Krishna sees Gopakumara and he comes. You know what? At the festival 2 years ago, they chose the Brihad Bhagavatamritam as the topic. And on the final day of the festival, I read what this is describing, this painting. I read that to the whole audience. It's so amazing. And Krishna and Gopakumar faint. Both of them faint. And the other cowherd boys are wondering, well, who is this cowherd boy? Who is this? Like that. I won't tell more about it. You have to read it yourself. So, you leave it here. You know, just for now. No. So, I still didn't say my pronouns. Oh. No, I'll just start now. Anyone wanted to speak anything? She's there, right there. I'm asking, she's not answering.
Well, Braj, have you spoke?
Yeah, he spoke already. You want to speak something?
How about if I'll just speak tonight? Is that all right?
Tonight. There's not going to be anyone here. There's hardly any devotees.
Let's do it.
I'm doing it. I'll move my chair.
Let's go.
So, I just thought I'd say a few words. Can you hear me?
Use the mic.
So I just thought I'd say a few words on how I first met Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Swami through his books. So I was at Nagapatni's house, and those women were so nice to me when I was in a devotee, those fine women. Anyway, I was just visiting with her. And she, I was looking at a bookcase and I found this book and I looked at it a little bit. And I said, could I borrow it? And you know what, I don't remember. She said, you could have it or you could borrow it. But she never got it back in any case. So
What year was that?
I don't remember.
Try to remember. Around what time? 1980s, 90s,
No.
2000s, 2010s?
Okay, thanks. Okay, well, let's see, I met my man in 93, 95. I don't know, maybe from somewhere after 1995.
Okay.
Okay, so I just wanted to read a little bit from this. Because, it's just like, of course, everyone knows
Tell the title of the book.
Build the volcano of divine love. So everyone knows how beautiful he writes and everything, but I'm just gonna, because to me it's just like when I read it, you know, I don't know, it's just, you know, it's presented so differently, and I learned something new all the time. Okay, here's just a little snippet. Gauri Leela is more generous than Krishna Leela. In the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Krishna Das Kaviraj Goswami explains his conception of the difference between Gauri Leela and Krishna Leela. He says, there is no doubt that we find the highest nectarine taste of Ras in Krishna Leela. But what is Gauri Leela? In Gauri Leela, the nectar of Krishna Leela is not confined in a limited circle, but is being distributed on all sides. It is just as if from all 10 sides of the nectarine lake of Krishna Leela, hundreds of streams are flowing. Okay. So the mercy, So the mercy of Nityananda Prabhu is our primary necessity. To be reinstated as a servant of the servant to the extreme degree is the philosophy of Gaudiya Vaishnavism. Okay. By the grace of Nityananda Prabhu, we develop our attraction for Sri Gauranga. If we receive the grace of Sri Gauranga, we receive everything in the highest degree. And that is the safest way to approach Radha Govinda. If we try to achieve Radha Govinda in some other way, our attempt will naturally be artificial and defective. If we approach Radha Govinda directly, avoiding Sri Gauranga, there will be great difficulty. Okay. Oh yeah. So then it's talking about, we should invest all our energy in the service of Sri Gauranga. And then it says, how one has been carried there will be unknown to him. But those who have good fortune invest everything in the service of Gauranga. Anyway, he really just made me, you know, fall in love with Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Anyway, that's all I have to say about it. Is that just that?
Tell what you feel about your relationship with Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj.
You know, it just makes me happy, that's all.
Why? Explain, so we can also enter.
He's just so positive and beautiful, you know. And somewhere in my books, of course I didn't have time to find it, he says that, somewhere in his books, that every living entity will end up in Golok Vrindavan. I'm paraphrasing, obviously. So, you know, it's just things like that. You know, for me, it allows me the ability to hang on, just, you know.
What is it about that enables you to hang on?
I don't know. Like, just when I hear the term, you know, Sri Krishna, reality, the beautiful, it's just like, that's it. That's what's actually happening. That is, you know, nothing else is real. And then the whole thing about, you know, Krishna is only sweetness. I don't even know if that's true. That whole Krishna is only sweetness thing. You can't, you know what I mean. What is there? Oh, yeah. What is it, Braj? For those of us who want Krishna consciousness, what is it, Braj? What is that?
What do you feel? It's that you get encouraged to go on regardless of your struggles.
No, I know. Braj, what is that? What is that quote about? For those of us who want Krishna consciousness, you can have it, and for those of us who don't, what's that?
Krishna consciousness, it's a very simple thing. If you want it, you get it.
Yeah.
Simple. If you want it, you get it. For the rest of us, there's no that you want it.
See? But I think I'm done with the life. I think I'm done. Is that okay?
Okay, very
All right,
nice.
thank you.
Thank you. Hare Krishna. Om Ajnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Iti Namani Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarane. Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Goswamin Iti Namani Devam Divyatanum Suchandavadanam Balarka Chelanchitam Sandranandapuram Sadekavaranam Vairagya Vidyam Buddhim Sri Siddhanta Nidhim Subhakta Lasitam Saraswatanam Varam Bande Tam Shubhadam Madeka Sharanam Nyashishvaram Sridharam. Namo Vishnupadaya Radhikaya Priyatmane Shri Srimad Bhakti Vedanta Narayan Iti Namani Vansha Kalpatarubhascha Kripa Sindhubhya Eva Cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Namo Mahabhajanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namane Gaura Trise Namaha. Nityanandam Namastubhyam Premananda Pradayane Kalo Kalmashanashaya Janava Pataye Namaha. Hey Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Bhaktya Vihina Aparadha Lakshay Kshiptascha Kamari Taranga Madhye Kripa Maitvam Sharanam Prapanna Vrinde Numaste Charanarvindam. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shrivas Adi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. First of all, I'm offering my unlimited Dandavat Pranams and my Shraddha Pushpanjali at the lotus feet of my most worshipable beloved Gurudev, Nitya Lila Pravishta, Om Vishnupad Paramahansa, Asto Tarasata Sri Srila, A.C. Bhakti Vedanta Swami Maharaj, Srila Prabhupada. And then I'm offering my same unlimited Dandavat Pranams at the lotus feet of my most worshipable beloved Siksha Gurudevs, Nitya Lila Pravishta, Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Asto Tarasata Sri Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Goswami Maharaj on his transcendental Tirobhav Mahamahotsav Titi. We are observing his divine disappearance day today. And I offer my obeisances unto Nitya Lila Pravishta Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Astatarasata Sri Srila Bhakti Vedanta Narayan Goswami Maharaj. And my Dandavat pranams to the lotus feet of all of my Sri Sri Rupanuga Guru Varga. And my Dandavat pranams to all the Vaishnavas and to all the Vaishnavis. Just so that you can hear the meter of Srila Sridhar Maharaj's beautiful poem, Premadama Deva Stotram. I'm reading a couple of verses from it. This is the first sloka, 72 slokas long. Deva Siddha Mukta Yukta Bhakta Vrinda Vanditam Papa Tapa Dava Daha Dagda Dukka Kanditam Krishna Nama Sidhu Dama Dhanya Dana Sagaram Prema Dhama Devam Eva Nomi Gauda Sundaram. You can all repeat. Prema Dama Devam Eva Nomi Gauda Sundaram. Prema Dama Devam Eva Nomi Gauda Sundaram. Prema Dama Devam Eva Nomi Gauda Sundaram. So here, the translation of this, the universal gods, the perfected beings, the salvationists, the mystic yogis, and the exalted servitors of the absolute truth, Sri Krishna, constantly chant the glories of Sri Gaur Sundar. And in regard to Lord Chaitanya's pastimes, Srila Rupa Goswami has mentioned the following verse in his Sri Chaitanya Ashtakam. Sado Pashya Shriman Drita Manuja Kayai Pranaitam Vahad Bir Gir Vanayar Girisha Parameshti Prabriti Bhi. The gods, headed by Lord Shiva and Lord Brahma, accepted the garb of ordinary men in the pastimes of Sri Chaitanya Dev in order to eternally worship him with heartfelt affection. Sri Chaitanya Dev is the embodiment of that vast nectarine ocean found in Lord Krishna's holy name, which is none other than Sri Gauranga's own pure name. Sri Chaitanya Dev is compared to that grand milk ocean, which, after being churned, produced nectar. The nectar Mahaprabhu distributes is Lord Krishna's holy names, which extinguish all the miseries of material existence, such as anxieties arising from sinful activities performed in direct opposition to the Lord, and the threefold sufferings which fuel the grand forest fire that scorches those in search of sense gratification, salvation, and mystic yoga perfections. That's his expanded translation of his verse that you just heard, the Sanskrit of. He says, at the end of every verse, he says, I offer my obeisances to that beautiful golden Lord, Gaur Sundar, the divine form of Krishna Prema. Prema Dama Devam Eva Nomi Gaura Sundaram. So then the second verse, Svarna Koti Darpanava Deha Varna Gauravam Padma Parijata Gandha Vanditanga Sauravam Koti Kama Murchitangri Rupa Rasa Rangaram Prema Dama Devam Eva Nomi Gaura Sundaram. I don't know if you can hear the alliteration and the poetical flow of this, but it's amazing. The charming aura of Sri Gaur Sundar's divine figure resembles the reflection of millions of radiant golden mirrors. Furthermore, the personified sweet fragrance of the earthly and the heavenly lotus flowers, humbly offer their prayers before the aromatic scent which permeates the air from the beautiful form of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Millions and millions of cupids fall unconscious before the feet of Sri Chaitanya Dev's elegant figure. They are severely shocked because their sense of universal fame arising from their beautiful splendor is checked. While performing his joyful pastimes of dancing, the divine form of Sri Gauranga Dev playfully sways to and fro. The flowing pulsations of the Lord's limbs move in rhythm with the various charming moods of devotional sentiments, bhav, overwhelming his graceful figure. I offer my obeisances to that beautiful golden Lord, Gauranga Sundar, the divine form of Krishna Prem. Verse 3. Prema nama dana janya pancha tattva katmakam sangha divya parsha dastra vaibhavavatarakam shyama gaura nama gana nritya matta nagaram prema dama devam eva nomi gaura sundaram. Everyone say, Prema dama devam eva nomi gaura sundaram. By manifesting his fivefold aspect of divinity, Panchatattva, Sri Gauranga Dev was able to widely distribute the sweet names of Lord Krishna, which is the means to the ultimate attainment in human life. Unalloyed love for the absolute truth, Sri Krishna, the fifth end. And this fifth end refers to that which is beyond the attainment of Dharma, Artha, Kama, and Moksha, religiosity, economic development, sense gratification, and liberation. So the Lord personally incarnated on the earth planet with his expansions such as Nityananda Prabhu and Advaita Acharya, his intimate associates such as Gadadhar Pandit, and his other general associates such as Srivas Thakur. When the Lord appears, he comes armed with the weapon of the holy name of Krishna. And while dancing in the deepest ecstasies of pure love, Lord Gauranga Dev, although none other than Shyama Sundar, chanted his own names just like an ordinary citizen in the Nadia district. I offer my obeisances to that beautiful golden Lord, Gauranga Sundar, the divine form of Krishna Prem. Santi Purya Disha Kalya Dharma Dukkha Dukshaham Jiva Dukkha Hanna Bhakta Sokya Dana Vigraham Kalya Goga Nasha Krishna Nama Sidhu Chancharam Prema Dama Devam Eva Nomi Gaura Sundaram. Appearing in his deity form, Sri Gauranga Dev removed the miserable condition of the living entities, and he increased the devotional pleasure of his devotees. The Lord incarnated because he was unable to tolerate the grief-stricken condition of Sri Advaita Acharya, the master of that charming village of Shantipur. Sri Advaita Acharya was lamenting about this era being overtaken by the ugly influence of irreligious practices. Thus, in order to arrest the immoral activities in Kali Yuga, the Lord profusely distributed the sweet nectar of Lord Krishna's holy names. I offer my obeisances to that beautiful golden Lord, Gauranga Sundar, the divine form of Krishna Prem. I'll read one more. Dvipanavya Ganga Banga Janma Karma Darshitam Srinivasa Vasa Danya Nama Rasa Harshitam Shri Hari Priyesha Pujadi Sachi Purandaram Prema Dama Devam Eva Nomi Gaura Sundaram. Sri Gurudev appeared in West Bengal in the sacred place known as Navadweep on the banks of the Ganges River. Can you try to keep the kids a bit more quiet back there? Sri Gurudev appeared in West Bengal in the sacred place known as Navadweep on the banks of the river Ganges. Revealing his household pastimes in the holy abode of Navadweep, Sri Gaura benedicted the beautiful courtyard surrounding Srinivas Pandit's residence and pleased his dearmost associates when he manifested his nocturnal pastimes of congregational chanting in the deepest mellows of pure dedication. The controlling life force of Lakshmi Priya Devi and Vishnu Priya Devi was Sri Gaur Sundar, whose intelligence was couched in deep parental adoration for his mother and father, Sachi Devi and Jagannath Mishra. I offer my obeisances to that beautiful golden Lord, Gauranga Sundar, the divine form of Krishna Prem. So that's just to give a little taste. And as you can see, Srila Sridhar Maharaj is giving an outline of the entire, life history of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, highlighting in 72 verses all of his moods and contributions and the different stages of his pastimes and Leela and everything like that. So it's a treasure which should be relished and tasted by every single devotee, especially in our Gaur Saraswat Gaudiya Guru Parampara, coming down from Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur. So, just to give a little bit of a background of his life, we have a very nice sketch of his life. It's a short sketch about the author. His Divine Grace Sri Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Dev Goswami Maharaj, the founder of the Sri Chaitanya Saraswat Mat, was born in India in 1895 in a respected Brahmin family of the Bhatta Acharya order at Hapaniya, district Burdwan, West Bengal. He received his education at Baharampur University. Having taken his pious birth in Sri Gauramandala, the holy lands where Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu exhibited his divine pastimes on this earth, Srila Sridhar Maharaj, from his very childhood, had a natural affinity for the mission of Sri Chaitanya Sankirtan, the grand congregational chanting of the holy names of the Supreme Lord. In 1926, Srila Sridhar Maharaj joined the Gaudiya Mat, and he became an initiated disciple of its founder, the illustrious Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Goswami Prabhupada. He later accepted the holy order of sannyas in 1930. Recognizing him as a faithful, stalwart preacher of the perfect precepts of Gaudiya Vaishnavism, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada conferred upon him the name Sri Bhakti Rakshak, which means guardian of devotion. And further echoing the statement of the great Vaishnava preceptor, Srila Jiva Goswami, who referred in his Sanskrit writings to the renowned Srimad Bhagavatam commentator, Sri Sridhar Swami as Bhakti Eka Rakshak, Supreme Guardian of Devotion. So Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada gave him the Tridandi Sannyas title of Sridhar. Thus he became Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj. So you follow this point? You understand this point? Who can explain?
There's a commentary.
Brett, get the mic. Get the mic.
There's a commentator who is acknowledged in our line named Sridhar Swami. He's written commentaries on so many Vaishnava literatures. And evidently he was given the nickname Rakshak, he said.
No, he is the original commentator in our line that was accepted by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu as being like the original and the main commentator with the Vaishnava conceptions of Srimad Bhagavatam. So that is, his name is Sridhar Swami.
And he was given the title Rakshak. So in light of that...
No. It was... Let me find this.
I'm glad I explained.
No, but it's good. I want you to tell. Further echoing the statement of the great Vaishnava preceptor Srila Jiva Goswami, his statement, who referred in his Sanskrit writings to the renowned Srimad Bhagavatam commentator Sri Sridhar Swami as Bhakti Eka Rakshak, the supreme guardian of devotion. So Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada gave him the Tridandi Sannyas title of Sridhar, out of the 108 names. And thus he became Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj. So he also gave him the name Rakshak. So the original Sridhar Swami was called Bhakti Eka Rakshak by Jiva Goswami. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, recognizing Srila Sridhar Maharaj's vast learning and his position as an exalted, poet and commentator and author and all of that, he gave him Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar. That's very interesting. So then, as a prominent preacher in the Sri Gaudiya Math mission, he traveled extensively throughout India. And he preached fluently in Bengali, Hindi, Sanskrit, and English, spreading the teachings of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu on many levels in universities, in public seminars, and in Sankirtan festivals. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada also expressed high appreciation of Srila Sridhar Maharaj's Sanskrit composition, Sri Bhaktivinod Viraha Dasakam. So this is one of many astakams and dasakams, poetry in glorification of our previous acharyas, written by Srila Sridhar Maharaj. And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati particularly liked his composition, Sri Bhaktivinod Viraha Dasakam, considering it an omen of assurance that the grand ideals and the dignity of the Sri Gaudiya Sampradaya would be perfectly upheld and preached by such a learned and sensitive devotee as Srila Sridhar Maharaj. So as a testimony to this fact, just prior to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada's departure from this mortal world, Srila Prabhupada had Srila Sridhar Maharaj sing in his presence the holy prayer most venerated by the entire Sri Gaudiya Vaishnava community, Sri Rupa Manjari Pada. And after the passing of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Goswami Prabhupada, Srila Sridhar Maharaj's godbrothers, associates, and the public, they naturally revered him as the senior most representative of the Sri Gaudiya Sampradaya. In particular, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj, who was at that time in householder life, he assigned a large portion of his house in Calcutta to be used by Srila Sridhar Maharaj as his preaching headquarters. And thus, these two great personalities Srila Sridhar Maharaj and Srila Swami Maharaj were intimately associated for many years in the early days, and they remained intimate friends throughout their lives. Although Srila Sridhar Maharaj was more inclined to anonymity as a humble Vaishnava, but he nonetheless, by the call of divine duty and divine inspiration, he established the Sri Chaitanya Saraswat Mat at Sri Navadvip Dham, hinting in a short Sanskrit poem that the Mat, as a sanctuary, where the holy message of his Guru, his Gurudev and Sri Rupa and Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was preached, that this Mat would inevitably become renowned throughout the world amongst the sincere and the pious seekers of unalloyed truth and divinity. And guess what? That happened. Srila Sridhar Maharaj is the composer of numerous classical prayers and commentaries in Sanskrit and Bengali. His works are hailed as gems of pure Vaishnavism by scholars, philosophers, and devotees worldwide. He authored the book Sri Sri Prapanna Jivanamritam, which is a Sanskrit devotional treatise on the subject of divine surrender, which has become a standard textbook for devotees everywhere. Upon reaching his 80s, and by the way, that's been translated into a very beautiful edition in English language. Everyone should read that book. Have you read that book yet? Okay, you're first on the list. You gotta read that book.
Do you have it?
Yeah, it's online, you can download it.
Oh, I can. Same thing.
Anyone read that book here?
I don't remember much, but I read
Okay. So, I just give a small comment. One time I was with our godbrother Akhoyananda Swami, who later became Bhakti Ananda Sagar Maharaj, and he told me of a pastime where he was sitting with Srila Prabhupada on the rooftop of the Bombay property that Prabhupada had purchased, which later became Sri Sri Radha Rasa Bihari temple, right? So he used to stay on the roof, he used to do darshans. Prabhupada used to do darshans in one of the, it was like 4 or 5 tenement housing apartment buildings on that land, on that property. So Prabhupada would sit on the rooftop. You can see there's videos and there's also photos of Srila Prabhupada sitting, and quite often it's very tropical and hot. So Prabhupada is just sitting only with his uttariya on, and you can see his beautiful divine form. And he had many, many relaxing moments there, and devotees would come and he'd give darshan. And so in one of the darshans, he asked his disciples who were sitting in front of him, of which Akhoyananda Swami was one of them, and he said, so, you know that there are 6 limbs of Sharanagati, the process of surrender. Can anyone name those 6 limbs? And there were many big leaders of ISKCON there, and none of them were able to utter anything. So then Akhoyananda raised his hand and said, yes, Prabhupada, I can tell. Tell. Then he started to tell the 6 limbs, right? But he only got to number 5 of the 6 limbs. And he was thinking, see, I know, these others, they don't know. So Krishna smashed him right there in front of his spiritual master. And he said, and what is the 6th one? I can't remember, Prabhupada. And Prabhupada said, humility. So then Prabhupada told to him and to the devotees, I have a godbrother named Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj who has written a very, very beautiful book on this subject matter of surrender, which is very important. And at that time, that book was not yet translated into English language, but Prabhupada told them there and then that you should all read this book from my godbrother. So then, Akhoyananda tells the story that literally just a few short years later after Prabhupada departed, around 1980, he came to Sri Chaitanya Saraswati Mutt with all of the disturbances that were going on in ISKCON at that time, and he sought out the association of Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj, who was at that time kind of starting to give a lot of darshans to the ISKCON leaders and so forth. Maybe it was slightly later than 1980, I don't remember exactly. But anyway, he came there and he paid his dandavats to the lotus feet of Srila Sridhar Maharaj, and he began to associate with him and began to live there actually in the mutt. And after some days, he requested from Srila Sridhar Maharaj, after hearing so many different, dissertations, he requested Srila Sridhar Maharaj if there's some service that he could specifically do for him. So then Srila Sridhar Maharaj said, yes, actually I have a couple of manuscripts and they need to be typed out. They need to be typed out. So then Akoyananda said, yes, I know how to type. So I would be very happy to do that service. So then he instructed one of his disciples to give this manuscript to him. So the next day, when he sat down at his typewriter, and he's looking at the rough manuscript, and he begins to type. And he begins to type the name of the title of the book. Prapanna Jivan Amritam. Nectar in the lives of the surrendered souls. Then he suddenly realized, this is the book that Prabhupada told us to read. What an amazing thing. And now I'm doing service to this very book, So that was his experience there. So that book actually was published by him and by Dayadhar Gauranga, who later became Rishikesh Maharaj. They printed it in Germany around 1984, 1985. And so it's a very beautiful version. It's like they even made it kind of pocket-sized because it's almost like a handbook. What Srila Sridhar Maharaj did was he collected all various, divided the book in about 10 chapters. And 6 of those chapters are regarding the 6 limbs. And then there's 2 chapters before that, and then 2 chapters after completing the book. And he wrote himself many Sanskrit shlokas as well in that book. But the main body of the book are chapters wherein he's presenting each one of the limbs. Like, for example, what's the first limb of surrender?
To accept that which is favorable.
Yes. Anukulyasya sankalpa. To accept everything that is anukul for bhakti. Anukulyasya. Then pratikulya vivarjanam. To reject everything that is unfavorable. That's a big test for most devotees. Yeah. Because you're not surrendered unless you're embracing those 2 first preliminary limbs of Sharanagati. If you're doing knowingly things that are completely against bhakti, but you continue to do it and justify it, you're not a surrendered. You're doing quite the opposite. And Upadeshamrita has directly told, what are the 6 favorable things? What are the 6 unfavorable things? So, this is the test. Can you follow that? If you're not following it, you're not surrendered. And if you're not surrendered, then what?
The doorway to bhakti.
Yeah, the doorway to bhakti is closed. You cannot enter Shuddha bhakti. You barely can enter mixed bhakti. Okay? So, like that, Srila Sridhar Maharaj collected verses from all different shastras. In an ingenious way, he arranged these verses, and with a Bengali few lines introducing each verse, so that by the time you get to the end of each chapter, you'll perfectly understand what is Sharanagati, what is this limb of Sharanagati, and how to execute it in your life. You see? So, yes. So now the little short sketch goes on. Upon reaching his 80s, so that would be in the late 1970s. Upon reaching his 80s, not only Indians, but persons from America, Europe, and the world over, they became attracted by Srila Sridhar Maharaj's teachings and his personality. He was known as a pure saint of the most simple living habits. He was respected and loved for his saintly simplicity and his affectionate nature and dealings. He was revered by his godbrothers, his disciples, other devotees, and the general public, and was unanimously venerated for his formidable encyclopedic command of the revealed scriptures and his unique and unprecedented style of casting newer and newer light upon the most internal, philosophical, and revelatory purports of pure Sri Gaudiya Vaishnava Siddhanta. Very nice sentence. You know, there was a book compiled by Nrsimha Maharaj, our godbrother who's left this world. And I forget what he put as the title. But what it was a compilation of English statements that Srila Sridhar Maharaj made in various books and like this. One-liners practically, you know. That is such an amazing classic book. And in fact, when you look at Srila Sridhar Maharaj's writings, paragraph by paragraph, sentence by sentence, each sentence can practically stand on its own as like just a classic that you have to commit to your memory. You could just write these different sentences on the walls of all the buildings, you know, as inspirational statements, right? You know? So, just like the 3-word sentence. Die to live. You can read entire discourses from Srila Sridhar Maharaj explaining those 3 words. What does it mean? Die to live. Actually, those 3 words came from Bhakti Vinod Thakur. But Srila Sridhar Maharaj utilized that and gave a very, very deep understanding. What does it mean to die to live? So I'll tell you the poem from which he took it. It's a poem composed by Srila Bhakti Vinod Thakur. And the poem is in glorification of Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur, because Srila Bhakti Vinod Thakur lived in Puri, right near to the Samadhi of Srila Namacharya Haridas Thakur. Jai Shri Shri Guru Gauranga Gandharika Giridhari Radha Vinod Hari Radha Govinda Ji Ki Jai. So it's not there anymore, but it was actually placed on the Samadhi of Srila Namacharya Haridas Thakur at that time during the 1890s when Bhakti Vinod Thakur was living there, and Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur also. And it's a famous poem. You probably recognize it when I tell. It's just a one verse. He says, he reasons ill who says that Vaishnavas die. You ever hear that one? You know it? Anyone know it by heart?
I'm going to give it a shot.
Huh?
When I don't, now that she's applauding, I feel completely embarrassed. The reasons that will say that Vaishnavas die when
when thou art living still in sound.
Vaishnavas die to live, and living spread the holy name around.
And living try to spread the holy name around. I'll say it again. He reasons ill who says that Vaishnavas die when thou art living still in sound. Right? Do we understand that principle? Yes, we do. We experience it every single day when we're reading the works and the literatures left by the great Vaishnava personalities, their commentaries, everything. So he's saying that someone who says that Vaishnavas die, they are reasoning ill. Meaning what? They got the wrong understanding. He reasons ill who says that Vaishnavas die when thou art living still in sound. The Vaishnavas die to live, and living try to spread the holy name around. So that's where this came. Die to live. The Vaishnavas die to live, and living try to spread the holy name around. So what does that mean? Any little comment on what does it mean, die to live, according to the way that Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur has referred to it, and as Srila Sridhar Maharaj has expanded upon it. What does it mean to die to live? Give him the mic. Give him the mic.
It means the self-conceptions that we're harboring in this material world should die, and our real identity as a servant of Krishna.
What are those conceptions that have to die?
I and mine.
Yeah.
And our real identity should emerge, and we should live in that real identity.
Can that real identity live at the same time with these other?
No.
No, that's what it means. Die. It has to die. Everyone should know that. There is no way without that. Give some comment, Rishabh, on this. We've been living in trying to be in Krishna consciousness for 50 years or whatever, okay?
So even when we first come, the attitude is that my material existence shall die. And that material existence is replaced with so that we can be engaged in pure devotional service. And ultimately, it's a mystical state to actually leave behind material existence and material conceptions. Because what's revived is our eternal form and function. And in this world, that means to spread the glory of that divine place around to all souls, so that they also may enter into the realm we have.
Can you do that if you haven't died?
No, one has to die to live. So,
and then he has to live in what? What is the living part of this? See, this is for the sadhaks. This is not for the siddhas. The sadhaks have to learn how to die so that you can live in this very body. So you have to die. You have to let all of that die. Yeah, go ahead.
So even in the very beginning, in sadhana bhakti, the spiritual master gives one a process by where his material existence is replaced with an existence of hearing and chanting and remembering the Supreme Lord. And also many things that proceed from that, deity worship, so many things, even the feelings that one has to the Supreme Lord, all that develops, that replaces the conception of not only being this body, but being an enjoyer in this world, an exploiter. One becomes dedicated by surrendering to those instructions, and thus has a spiritual existence rather than material.
That's another theme of Srila Sridhar Maharaj's preaching.
Dedication.
The land of dedication. We are now living in the land of exploitation. So, he was explaining that there are two different realms. which currently the conditioned souls are living in this realm, which is called the land of exploitation. Everyone is trying to exploit. Everyone, every single jiva is trying to exploit, especially those that come up to the human form. Now, like they have the Western saying, Braj, he's an expert at all Western sayings, the world is my oyster. Yes, thank you. What's that mean? The world is my oyster. Huh? What does that mean? In Vaishnava understanding.
Like this to enjoy, there's a pearl inside.
Yeah.
Yeah, like
The pearl is
I
mine.
can exploit anything in this world because it's mine. So that misconception is cast over the conditioned soul entering into this material existence of Maya, the domain of Maya, and the attitude and the temperament of the conditioned soul is that I am the Purusha, I am the enjoyer. When that becomes extreme, that tendency and the attitude that I am the enjoyer, what happens? The conditioned soul becomes more and more covered by Maya and illusion and develops a demonic temperament which is against the existence of the Supreme Lord and anything connected to Him. That clearly Krishna showed that in the 16th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, divine and demoniac natures. Right? So, coming into the realm of the land of dedication, which means bhakti, the conditioned soul can let go of the exploiting tendency by doing what? Sharanagati. Surrender to Krishna. Surrender to Krishna's pure devotee. Give up your exploitation independence from the Supreme Lord. There's another class of individuals, Srila Sridhar Maharaj explained, who are liberationists, or elevationists. He has these two terms. They are giving up the exploiting tendency because they see that this exploiting nature prohibits them from entering into a state of freedom from the suffering of this material world. So they're trying to go in the opposite direction of tyaga. Tyaga means renunciation, giving up. And it's like a pendulum. A pendulum swings back and forth. So, in the material world, there are these two opposite sides that the pendulum keeps on swinging back and forth from. Srila Prabhupada nicely explains this in his introduction to the Nectar of Devotion. Bhog and Tyag. The word Bhog means enjoyment and Tyag means renunciation. So the living entities who are in the material world and they are not yet ready or they're not willing to give up their independence from the Supreme Lord and become His servant and begin the process of service and dedication, they have to live within these two realms of exploitation, and then when they become tired of exploitation, oh, then now liberation, liberation, aham brahmasmi, and they want that side. But in actuality, they're two sides of the same coin. They're not different in actuality because they're both separate from the interest of the Supreme Lord, and there's no surrender to the Supreme Lord. So, Srila Sridhar Maharaj talked about this a lot. It was one of his themes. And he would say, we want to enter into the land of dedication. And the way that he would present the land of dedication was very charming, very enthralling, very sweet, full of nectar. And that's one of the unique things about Srila Sridhar Maharaj. I've seen people over the many, many years, like decades, I've seen different individuals that I meet. Some of them have become devotees already. Some of them are still like on the borderline of becoming devotees. But just like Rangalata Didi was telling about her attraction and how Srila Sridhar Maharaj's words touched her, you see. And there are people I've met who just became completely enthralled by it. They even read some of Srila Prabhupada's books, but Srila Sridhar Maharaj had a special something touch their heart. There's one person who's becoming a devotee, who lives in Los Angeles. He's actually a devotee already. He got initiated by Srila Bhaktivedanta Bharati Maharaj. His name is Yashodanandan. And he is the manager of the apartment in North Hollywood where Pran Kishore Prabhu and Champa Katha, they live there in that apartment. And especially Pran has been a great influence, positive influence in his life. He came up here. He came up here for Gurudev's Vyas Puja, I think it was. Yeah, I think it was that day that he came up. I met him a couple of times down in LA, but when he came up here, I spent a little time with him. Pran also asked me, share with him. And he told me, and actually he's a movie maker, movie producer. He did a documentary film about his own life, and even it won some awards. And he said to me, he says, I am completely captured by Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj. And he would reiterate that to me again and again, and he would say, I want to dedicate the next 20 years of my life, maybe I will live that long, he's probably in his late 50s or something, and I want to make a documentary film of Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj. Do you have any of the original? I need the original, whatever videos there are, I need it in original form, the highest quality, you know about that, and photos and all these things. I need that. Do you have access to that? So he's one individual that has become completely, swept away. Just swept away by Srila Sridhar Maharaj. So anyway, a vast library of Srila Sridhar Maharaj's taped discourses has been compiled by his disciples, and from such recordings the exquisite English books Search for Sri Krishna, Reality the Beautiful, Sri Guru and His Grace, The Golden Volcano of Divine Love, Loving Search for the Lost Servant, and Srila Sridhar Maharaj's unique commentary and interpretation of Srimad Bhagavad Gita, The Hidden Treasure of the Sweet Absolute, and many other books have been published. Many more publications are also anticipated. So on August 12th, 1988, His Divine Grace, Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Dev Goswami Maharaj departed from this world to enter into his eternal pastimes. I was here in Badger. Braj knows something about that day. So his departure did not herald the departure of one of the great stars of the Gaudiya Vaishnava firmament, but that of the moon itself. Even the earth herself trembled on 2 occasions, forecasting and punctuating the event. A divine temple, the temple of union and separation, was erected at his holy shrine at Sri Chaitanya Saraswat Navadvip, and worship will continue through the generations. So that's the small. There's another nicely presented book. There's an actual book, and it's here. It has like 3 parts of this book. It was on some special occasion that they published this book. I forget when it was. But Srila Sridhar Maharaj, in that book, he himself tells about his own life, and he remembers from his early childhood, and he begins to tell the different experiences in his own life. Then there's also an article written by our godmother, Bhakti Sudhir Goswami. He wrote a very nice compilation to introduce Srila Sridhar Maharaj, somewhat like this, but it goes back to his childhood and his interrelations with his godbrothers and so forth. And yeah. So now, this next section, I'm reading from the folio. from 1973 to 1980, there are transcripts. And then after 1980, then each year there's a transcript until he departed. So these are a compilation of informal conversations and discourses delivered in Sri Chaitanya Saraswat Math, Sri Navadvip, West Bengal, India. So the first one here is a room conversation between our Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada and Srila Sridhar Maharaj, March 17th, 1973. And it has a little thing here that the first two paragraphs are missing from the BBT transcription, but they're here. So Srila Sridhar Maharaj begins by saying, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. So, because he's sitting in his room and there are disciples. And this is one of the first times that both of them are sitting together and it's being recorded. So now Srila Sridhar Maharaj says, so our Swami Maharaj has done a miracle. And then he's chuckling in a very wonderful way and he's saying, he has done a miracle. What Bhakti Vinod conceived and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada tried, according to his conception, to translate into action. We find that through Swami Maharaj, in his last days, these revelations have been fulfilled. Now that statement, okay? We can't conceive of how Srila Sridhar Maharaj must feel. Huh? So he says, we are happy, we are glad, we are proud of Swami Maharaj and of you all too. He's pointing to all the Western disciples. When any person comes to take Diksha and to stay at the Mutt, we say that after wandering for a long time in a foreign land, he is again coming back to his home. Home means homeward, back to God, back to home, back to Godhead. Back to Godhead means back to home, sweet, sweet home. Our home and life is there and nowhere else. So we may be quite free there of any misgivings or misconduct. With such bold and clear faith, we can go on, onward and onward. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Vansha kalpatarubhascha kripa sindhu bhevacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namah. That's his little few words. Then Srila Prabhupada says, Jai Om Vishnu Pad Paribrajakacharya. And he says the name of Srila Sridhar Maharaj. So, we are thinking, we are very much fortunate to hear His Divine Grace, Om Vishnu Pad Paramahansa Paribrajakacharya Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj. He is, by age and experience in both ways, he is senior to me. I am also always fortunate to have his association for a very long time, perhaps since 1930 or something like that. At that time, he did not accept sannyas. He just left home vanaprastha. In his white dress, he went to Allahabad, and then he does an aside to Srila Sridhar Maharaj, because they're sitting right next to one another on a Vyasasana. Then he says to him, Maharaj, I think you remember this incident when you went to Allahabad? Srila Sridhar Maharaj, yes, I do. Prabhupada, yes, thank you. At that time, Sridhar Maharaj, we took prasadam on the roof. Prabhupada, oh yes. Then everyone laughs. On that auspicious occasion, we were connected. Before that, in 1922, when I was manager in Bose Laboratory as a young man, I was a nationalist in the Congress Party. I was a devotee of Mahatma Gandhi at that time. Sridhar Maharaj says, 1920. But at the beginning of non-cooperation, and Srila Prabhupada said, no, I was in connection with Congress by 1917, when I became the Congress president. Then I became serious in 1920, and I gave up my education. So one of my friends, perhaps you know, Maharaj, that Naren Mundi, actually he was my intimate friend. So in their house, old Bhakti Pradeep Tirtha Maharaj, who was a disciple of Bhakti Vinod Thakur and later took sannyas from Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati. That's why they call him the old Bhakti Pradeep Tirtha Maharaj. So in their house, Tirtha Maharaj went to beg some alms. So he informed me that one nice sannyasi came to our house and he has invited us to go to Ultagana, where there is a Gaudiya monk. So he has invited me and I wish to go there. Why don't you come also? Let us go together. So this person, Naren Mundi, he was my very intimate friend. So what Prabhupada is doing is he's telling in front of Srila Sridhar Maharaj and his disciples how he first met Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur. So this friend said, we should go, right? Why don't you come also? Let us go together. He was my very intimate friend, so at that time I was a little hesitant. Why should I go? I know all the sadhus there. I am not going. But he forced me. Oh, why not? Let us go. All right, let us go. So I went to see His Divine Grace Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur in 1922 in the Ultagana. I think it's Ultadanga. Yes, Ultadanga building. So, at that time, Guru Maharaj was sitting on the roof of a small house at noon. He was very kind because the devotees saw that Lal Mundi was a very rich man and had contributed some money. So we went to see Prabhupada and to offer our obeisances, and immediately he said, you are all educated young men. Why don't you preach Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's message throughout the world? And so, because I was politically minded at that time, I replied to him that we are a dependent nation. Who will hear our message? We can speak about all these things after we get independence. So, yes. So he refuted my argument. That day, I was defeated. And I took his words very seriously. I appreciated him. Then we were offered some prasadam. We came down, and my friend asked me, how did you like this sadhu? And I replied, yes, here is a sadhu in whose hands Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's message is there, and it will be done. I think he was very nice. That was my appreciation. And then in 1923, I resigned from my post as manager of Bose Laboratory, and I accepted the agency of the whole of UP up to Delhi, and I made my head office in Allahabad. That's Varanasi. Prayag? Yeah, that's right, Prayag. He named his pharmacy Prayag Pharmacy. Right. So still, I was always thinking, oh yes, I met a very nice sadhu. So from the very beginning, that was my intuition, that I have met a real sadhu. So actually, he was Lavamatra Sadhu Sange Sarva Siddhi Hoy. He was actually, I could feel it for a moment. I was so much impressed with Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. It continued. And then in 1928, when there was a Kumbh Mela, Maharaj, when did you join Gaudiya Math? Srila Sridhar says 27. Srila Prabhupada, 27. That means, then Sridhar Maharaj says, I was 20 when I met Prabhupada in August 1926. That was my first meeting. And I joined the mission in May of 1927. Actually, he was 30. Now, in this way, Tirtha Maharaj and I became friends, and he held his first program in Allahabad in my house with, I think, Sara Vaishnava Brahmachari and Dear Krishna Brahmachari. Then Srila Sridhar Maharaj says, Yadava Maharaj. No, it's Jajavar. They're not transcribing this properly. It's Jajavar was also invited to my house, and before that I think I invited Bharati Maharaj, and you were there with Bharati Maharaj. Srila Sridhar Maharaj says, yes. Srila Prabhupada, yes. So in this way, my connection became developed with the Gaudiya Math. And then gradually the process began. Harishye taddanam shanai. Harinam takes everything away. I wanted to become a very big businessman, and there was good opportunity. I was very nicely associated with the chemical industry of India, Dr. Bose's laboratory, Bengal Chemical, and all of them, they liked my business organization. And then I started a big laboratory in Lucknow. Those were golden days, but gradually everything became tainted, and at last, my Allahabad business was lost. I had to hand it over to Dr. Chandra Bose because I was his agent. And there were some debts, so I told him, all right, you take this business. So in this way, the business was lost. So I was sitting at home, and Jajavar Maharaj came at that time. And Atulananda Brahmachari, Sarva something Brahmachari, they used to come to sell their subscriptions, and they were requesting, why don't you come to our mutt? Why don't you come to our mutt? You are now free. So I used to visit their temple, which was not far away from my house. And then my intimate relationship with the Gaudiya Math began. And in this way, I think in 1933, yes, they came to lay down the foundation stone of the Allahabad Math. Maharaj, I think you remember. Yes, Srila Sridhar says, we were coming from Vrindavan Parikrama. Srila Prabhupada, yes, Parikrama. And the Parikrama, that is also another intimate story. So in this way, Prabhupada is setting the stage for their mutual conversation, remembering how they met, what happened in their lives and all of this. And eventually he'll get to the point of when Srila Bhakti Pragyan Keshav Maharaj came there to visit him, and Puri Maharaj and so forth. And then how that business, from there he moved back to Calcutta. And then after the disappearance of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, then Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj after some years. This is like the whole history. They're sitting next to one another. So in this evening's program, I'm going to read the rest of it. Please come. Please everyone come to this program. You have to hear how they talk together and how they appreciate one another and glorify one another, and how Srila Prabhupada told there that my intimate association with Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj over a period of 10-11 years, staying in my house, we had many, many intimate conversations, and Krishna liked him to prepare me. So what a contribution from Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj. So we've run out of time. It's now time for the Guru Puja and the Artik. And so I'm offering my unlimited Dandavat Pranams, my Koti Dandavat Pranams at the lotus feet of my most beloved Siksha Gurudev, Nityalila Pravishta Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Astotara Sata Shri Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Goswami Maharaj on his divine Tirubhav Mahamahotsav Titi, and praying for a drop of his causeless mercy. so that we can one day really become surrendered souls and enter into Uttama Bhakti, pure Bhakti, as all of our great acharyas have preached. Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo. Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Goswami Maharaj ki jai. Tirobhav Mahamahotsav Titi Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Goswami Maharaj ki jai. Gaura Premanande Hari Hari Bol.
Jai Jaya Nitai, Jaya Gaur, Jaya Nitai, Jaya Gaur, Jaya Nitai, Jaya Gaur, Jaya Nitai, Jaya Sridhar Swami Maharaj ki
Someone can sing. Who's going to sing? What kids?